Ron Simmons, you had a great career at Florida State with Coach Bobby Bowden. Now you're in World Championship Wrestling, and you made a statement to me a while back that you have a goal that you've set out for yourself, and that is one to become the first black world champion in WCW history.
That's right, Jesse. You know, ever since Ron Simmons has been on this earth, people have put the odds against me. They said when I was raising myself on the streets that I wouldn't live to be 20. They said when I went down to Florida State as a 219-pound freshman that I wouldn't be no match for 310-pound nose guard center. Well, here I am, and I made 3 times All-American, Heisman Trophy candidate. And in this sport, I plan to go where no black man has gone before, and that's straight to the top and become the first man to wear that belt.
What's going on, peeps, and welcome to the 7th edition of the Secluded Paradyme here on YouTube.com. Broadcast yourself, folks, as well as InYourHeadOnline.com, the place to be to get all your wrestling news information and just to chill out with us crazy peeps over at the message boards over at InYourHeadOnline.com. I'm Spec-Son, and I'm glad to be here, aka Brightwave. And like I said, this is the 7th edition of Secluded Paradyme. And without further ado, as always, let's get right down to business. This episode of the Paradyme is going to chronicle a superstar who was truly one of a kind during the era of the late 80s and the early 90s in World Championship Wrestling. And I'm only going to cover his time in World Championship Wrestling from around 1988 all the way on to around 1993. And I'm talking about the man himself, the All-American Ron Simmons. Now, Ron Simmons, as we all know, the first black World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion in the sport of professional wrestling. Simmons, so many people say it was just due when you have the likes of the late, great Bobo Brazil, who tore up the wrestling rings around the late 50s and throughout the 1960s and early 70s throughout the several territories in the United States. And now you have, and then you come around in the year 1992, and you got a cat by the name of Ron Simmons, former former All-American from Florida State University during the early 80s. Great athlete. And, you know, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the fact how he won the championship and whatnot, but that's neither here or there. He is a former WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Ron Simmons, you can't take that away from him. But, you know, for this episode of the Paradyme, I just really want to give kind of like a just a profile of what Simmons was in WCW, kind of a rundown of the things that he did, some of the key points that he hit on, and that he achieved, some of the good stuff he did achieve in WCW during that time. So without further ado, I'm going to get right to it. Ron Simmons basically made his first impact in the old Jim Crockett Promotions. This was at a time where Jim Crockett Promotions was basically beginning to transition into what we eventually knew it to be as World Championship Wrestling during 1989. And Ron Simmons was one of the young inspiring athletes that were getting their marks on World Championship Wrestling, the actual television show that came on every Saturday mornings and Sunday afternoons on WTBS, the Superstation. And he was basically, just a jobber wrestler that was helping established talent get over. And eventually he got his big break during the late 1988, officially when Turner bought Jim Crockett Promotions, and he, Simmons that is, began teaming with Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert in what would become a pretty good tag team, and they were basically prepping themselves up for the upcoming United States Tag Team Championship Tournament, which will eventually culminate at the Clash of the Champions for season beatings, which was definitely a great event. But I don't want to dwell so much into the tournament, but basically the company felt that a guy by the name of Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, many of you know him, one of the greatest workers to come down to pipe and pro wrestling during the 1980s and the early 90s, before he tragically passed away, I believe in 1994. Rest in peace, Hot Stuff. You were definitely one of the greatest wrestlers. Didn't get your just due totally in terms of a main event level, but he's definitely one of the best mid-carders to ever come in the wrestling industry. And I think the company felt like, specifically Dusty Rhodes, who was still booking at the time before he was released from the company in late 1988. This is around November, December, that area. And Ron Simmons and Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert made it all the way to the finals of the tournament, in which they faced the Fantastics at season beatings in December of 1988, of course, for the Clash of the Champions in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I believe that's where it was. And they had a pretty darn good match, and I definitely recommend that some of you guys, if you want to see Ron Simmons' early work, you want to see him a little green, but a lot of ability, I definitely recommend that you go check that out. It's definitely something I think you will like. Those two teams had a pretty darn good match, and I think it went a long way into helping Ron Simmons understand the tag team ranks, which will eventually culminate when he it becomes a member of the famous team called Doom. And I guess we should talk about that right now. Doom, of course, was managed by the lovely and late woman Nancy Benoit / Nancy Sullivan in 1989. In NWA, it was still called, but basically World Championship Wrestling. And she was their manager, and along with Butch Reed, the natural Butch Reed, another great worker, who was basically at the time a singles guy just coming off a pretty decent run in the WWE, but now he is in Jim Crockett Promotions and really wasn't doing that much. And they put Ron Simmons, who really wasn't doing much either after his run with Eddie Gilbert. And of course Eddie Gilbert eventually teamed with former Varsity Club member Rick Steiner during 1988, and those two ironically won the United States Tag Team Championship, with Missy Hyatt being basically their valet. But before I get off on another tangent, because I can talk about that all day around 1989, but basically you had Ron Simmons and Butch Reed in Mass, and you had Woman who was managing them, and it was basically a opportunity for Woman to get back at Rick Steiner. Basically, she was playing him the entire time, and the Steiner brothers, so that she could be the manager of the tag team champions. And this is really the first dominant black tag team that I can remember in quite some time on the national